Hey, Bastish Bia for 64K and welcome to the first episode of Retro Remakes. So, what is the show going to be about? We're going to be looking at retro remakes of classic games, whether they be classic computer, console or arcade games, official or unofficial, everything is up for grabs. And the first game for this series is going to be a game called Fractalus, which is a PC remake of the original Lucasfilm game from the mid-80s. But before we check that one out, let's jump back to the mid-1980s and check out the original Lucasfilm release on the Commodore 64. Rescue on Fractalus was released on the Commodore 64 by Lucasfilm Games. It was the newly set up software company's first game and upon release became an instant classic. The game was a spaceship flight simulator with heavy arcade-style elements, where you were tasked with flying down to the planet Fractalus from your orbiting mothership and rescue downed pilots and fly them back safely to your orbiting base. But things are never as simple as that, as you have to evade and destroy enemy gun emplacements set up in the mountain regions, as well as sporadic alien craft attacks. You also had to contend with the possibility that the person you were rescuing was an alien in disguise, which could get on board your ship and destroy it. It was truly a unique game for its time. The game was headed up by David Fox, who had just joined the company's computer gaming division. He ended up sharing an office with Lauren Carpenter, who at the time was doing computer effects for ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, Lucasfilm's movie FX division, which he also did the impressive Genesis effect in the 1982 Star Trek movie The Wrath of Khan. David was immediately impressed with the fractal graphics system that Lauren had created for the effect. He asked if it could be used on the Atari 800 for a game application. Lauren laughed at the idea and said it was impossible, but little did David know that the seed was planted and Lauren took an Atari 800 home to work on this theory in secret. Only a few days later he presented a working version of the system on the Atari to David. He was absolutely blown away. This led Lauren to be lent to the games division until Fractalus was complete. David's original idea for the game was called Rebel Rescue. The game would essentially be the same, except it would be set in the Star Wars universe. George Lucas opposed this idea and insisted the games division be based on original ideas and not simply licensed games. Pity they didn't stick to that one. In a very short period of time, a demo was ready to be played. George was the first person to play the beta version. He pressed the fire button and there was no weapons. He was completely confused. David explained the game was about rescuing and not killing. George then came up with all the vital components that made the game a classic. Weapons were implemented, with him suggesting the gun emplacements and random saucer attacks, and the most important element of the possibility of not all rescuees being human. The entire game fell into place after that, with George's ideas all being implemented for its 1984 release. The game's name changed multiple times before going to print, from Rescue Mission to Behind the Jaggy Lines to its final incarnation, Rescue on Fractalus, a not so subtle reference to the game's engine, which also ended up being used on 1984's Ball Blazer, as well as later titles like the Eidolon and Coronis Rift. It was released to huge success, with Zap 64 magazine in the September 1985 issue giving the Commodore 64 version a 91% overall. David went on to work on many more classic Lucasfilm games such as Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And as for Lauren Carpenter, he went back to the FX division and ended up becoming a co-founder in Pixar Animation. Rescue on Fractalus is a simple game in retrospect, but it's still just as much fun to play today as it was over 35 years ago.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
And now that you know a little bit about the game history, let's take a look at the unofficial PC remake. Fractalus is an unofficial remake of Lucasfilm's Rescue on Fractalus that has been an ongoing work in progress for over 10 years now by LSD, Luke's Software and Design. This game is free and is available on Windows, Mac, Linux, and there's even a VR mode, supporting most of the major VR peripherals. The person responsible for this brilliant version is Luke Arnold, a software developer from Perth, Western Australia. He got his programming start on his dad's Commodore SX64, where he was introduced to BASIC, and things really progressed from there. This version here is 1.0 and was released in late December 2020. It brings the game right up to speed on all the features of the original, and although Luke says this may not be the last update, as he may have to do a few bug fixes, it's as close as it's ever been to the original. As you can see, the graphics are amazing, capturing the look and feel of the original while still feeling new and unique. The instruments in the cockpit are all very retro, making the connection between this and the original version all the more apparent. Just like the Lucasfilm version, this gives you the option to start on whatever level you want, depending on your skill level and whatever you're going to be dealing with. There's a nice rendition of the original game's main tune in the intro that sets the nostalgic mood really well. I played this on my PC with an Xbox 360 controller and it plays excellently, with very smooth gameplay, which makes it feel like a brilliant console-styled flight sim, with, just like the original, minimal keyboard controls for landing, airlock, etc, etc. Head on over to Luke's website for the game to see the entire update history of how this game has come together. He even thanks David Fox and Lauren Carpenter for helping get this remake as close to the original as possible. This truly is a passion project that's been updated many times since its original 2010 release date, and it's an amazing remake that looks and sounds brilliantly and should be tried by anyone who loves the original. And I'll leave a link in the description to the download page, which is free, so there's really no reason not to give this a shot. And thanks for joining me for this first episode of this new series. I'm Bastish B. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B for 64K, and welcome to the second episode of Retro Remakes. And what's this show about? Basically, I take a look at classic games, retro remakes of classic games, whether they're official or unofficial. And our second game for this series is a remake of Sonic the Hedgehog on the Commodore 64. This is based on the Sega Master System version. So before we check this one out, let's go back to that original. The original Sonic the Hedgehog game was released in 1991 by Sega on the Mega Drive and Genesis, and was a massive hit on the 16-bit system, injecting speed and tight quality platforming to the forefront. It was the first game that I ever played on my Mega Drive, but Sega was still supporting their 8-bit console, the Master System, and with their upcoming Game Gear, which was about to be released, they decided to make an 8-bit version of Sonic that could work for both those consoles. Enter Yuzo Koshiro, a Japanese composer who had scored countless brilliant Mega Drive scores, such as Revenge of Shinobi and Streets of Rage. He ended up setting up a small studio called Ancient, and they were hired to produce the 8-bit versions. The game's story was similar to its big 16-bit brother, with Robotnik up to his usual shenanigans by imprisoning animals and making them into mechs as part of his army. And you, as Sonic, were here to stop him and rescue all the critters. A lot of the levels are represented, but with just completely different stage designs and being much smaller in scale to the 16-bit version, but built to take advantage of what 8-bit could do. Core gameplay elements like finding all the Chaos Emeralds in the game being the only way to see the epic good ending, and by collecting over 50 rings by a level's end sends you into a bonus stage, this one throwing Sonic into a pinball-styled machine, similar to 1993's Sonic Spinball, which was released on the Mega Drive and Genesis. It was an impressive achievement, and even though it wasn't as speedy, they made up for that with a lot lot more platforming and clever exploration needed for each level. Koshiro also stepped in to do the Master System and Game Gear soundtracks, taking a couple of the iconic 16-bit tunes and making the rest of the soundtrack from scratch by himself. Both versions were really well received by critics and financially did well, although not in the same league as its 16-bit counterpart. Computer and Video Game magazine in their December 1991 issue said, "This is what Master System fans the world over have been waiting for, and what a debut this is for everyone's favorite Sega superstar. Sonic pelts around the smooth scrolling screen at a fair lick, and there's loads to explore throughout this feast of gorgeous sprites, beautifully detailed and colorful backdrops." Overall though, it's a much shorter, more condensed game, with the levels working in its favor, playing to the slower pace of the 8-bit systems, and using that to make exploration a more key factor in gameplay, as well as some great graphics and excellent tunes. It's a Sonic game that's just as relevant as the big 16-bit original.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
And now that you know a little bit about the Master System history version, let's check out the Commodore 64 one. Sonic the Hedgehog was released in 2021 on the Commodore 64, a full 30 years after its original debut. This is of course an unofficial version, although I think Yuzo Koshiro and original creator Yuji Naka would be impressed at what's been accomplished here. This remake of the 8-bit Master System version was done by Mr. Sid, the C64 master coder, behind the excellent Prince of Persia and Donkey Kong Jr. ports to the C64 over the last decade. Please check out my videos on both of these for more details. So all the gameplay and story elements are intact and the same, so let's look on over at the graphics and sound. The look of this game is just plain gorgeous for a C64 game, really capturing the feel of the Master System version, but still looking like a C64 game in the end. I really like the color choices used in Sonic. The various shades of blue make them look really detailed, and the backdrops are replicated extremely well with a massive amount of variety from level to level. It features all 6 Master System levels, with the Green Hill Zone, Bridge Zone, Jungle Zone, Labyrinth Zone, Scrap Brain Zone, and lastly Skybase Zone, plus the excellent pinball style bonus stage. The Sid music tracks by Mikhail Hastrup are great versions of the originals, and again managed to still sound and feel like C64 tracks, which I really love. Like the Master System version, it's a bit slower than the 16-bit one, focusing more on tricky level design and light exploration to compensate, and it still works really well despite a bit of slowdown here and there, which the Master System version also has. It still runs really well, and the scrolling is extremely smooth. Just due to the stages being a bit smaller, the game is easier to complete than the 16-bit Big Brother, although that damn underwater stage still overstays its welcome, but you could say that about almost any video game. I'm looking at you, Tomb Raider. I love this. I still can't believe I'm playing Sonic on the C64. It literally combines my 2 favorite things in gaming, the Commodore 64 and Sega, into one glorious package. It's so well made, and despite being able to complete it fairly quickly, you still got the task of doing it while collecting all the Chaos Emeralds for the proper ending, which is a pretty tough but doable task. This team has given us another classic right up there with the Super Mario Commodore 64 conversion. And if you want to play this on the original C64 hardware, you are going to need an REU or RAM expansion unit, as the game needs that to run, or an Ultimate 2 cartridge will do the trick. It's also playable through VAS once you set the RAM expansion option, or on a C64 Mini and Maxi as long as you use a D81 file. I'll leave a link to the download in the description, which has the D64 and D81 downloads for whatever you need. And thanks for joining me for the second episode of Retro Remakes. If you want to see the first one, it's over here. It's about Rescue on Fractalus, the PC remake. Definitely check that one out if you like that old game. Thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. And if you can please like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. And I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K and welcome to episode number 3 of Retro Remakes. So if you've never watched this show before, I take a look at remakes of classic computer and console games, official and unofficial. And the game we're going to have a look at today is Eye of the Beholder, originally released on DOS in 1991. We're going to be having a look at the Commodore 64 game, a remake that was released at the end of 2022. But before we look at that, let's go back to the original. Eye of the Beholder was a trilogy of dungeon crawlers, with the first originally released in 1991 by SSI and was developed by Westwood Associates, originally as an MS-DOS game and also ported to the Amiga, Sega CD, PC-98, Super NES, and later the Game Boy Advance. It's a classic-style RPG dungeon crawler set in the Dungeons & Dragons universe. The story for the game revolved around the city of Waterdeep, hiring a team of adventurers with the task of descending beneath the city to discover the source of evil emanating within and destroy it. The game was directed by Brett Sperry, who was the co-founder of Westwood together with Lewis Castle. He also created the massively influential real-time strategy series Command & Conquer. The game took place from a first-person perspective, as you search the sewers and dungeons, discovering hidden treasure, fighting all manner of beasts and solving puzzles, each one getting you one step lower and closer to the beholder. You start off with a party of 4, which you can make yourself: wizards, warriors, elves, everything that makes fantasy gaming so much fun. You can also increase the team size to 6 overall by recruiting NPCs you find along the way. The game's rule set was based on the second edition of Dungeons & Dragons rules, with its combat and magic all taking place in real time as you come across the creatures. Party formation and point and clicking options determine the outcome, which require quick reactions to options and strategies to win. The game went down an absolute storm in publications at the time, with Computer Gaming World saying a stunning, brilliant graphics and agonizingly tricky game, with both the DOS and Amiga versions being praised as being a huge leap forward in the genre. And by mid-1991 the game had already sold over 150,000 copies. And you know how rampant software piracy was at that time, so you can only imagine how many more people were playing it. On the down low, myself included. It was followed by 2 sequels, Legend of Dark Moon by Westwood themselves and Assault on Myth Draenor by publisher SSR. And now that you know a little bit about the origins, let's check out the new version. Eye of the Beholder was released on the Commodore 64 at the end of 2022 and was a game I was highly anticipating to play, but due to the C64 onslaught of releases and the time needed to get into this, I just had to put it aside until now, when I finally played it. Thank goodness it really lived up to all my expectations. This unofficial port of the DOS original was done by Andreas Larsson and his team of Oliver Lindau on the graphics, intro, and more. He also worked on the excellent Sonic port we looked at on episode 2, and the team of Lesch, Mirage, and 2 Follower on the sublimely detailed in-game graphics, plus the always reliable Linus giving the SID interpretations of some classic tunes. The game has been in development for many years, and it's so nice to see it finally released. Gameplay is exactly the same as the PC counterpart. All the real-time action, dungeon exploring, and light puzzle solving is all intact. Nothing has been lost or discarded in this port. In fact, it's got even more options, with the team's excellent implementation of an auto map feature, which you can switch to at any time, so no more need for pen and paper. And this truly makes this game way more accessible. If you have a real Commodore 128 system, you get even more, with being able to hook up to a dual screen setup to have the map on one screen and the game on the other, plus support for the 2 MHz mode to speed things up. Having said that though, the C64 version is pretty fast and responsive and plays plays well on a real system, although you're gonna need a 1351 mouse to play it realistically. If you don't, simply play it in VAS with a PC mouse, it works exceptionally well. If you've never played it before, it's 90% mouse driven with just a few simple keyboard strokes for map, bestiary and a help screen, so it's not too complicated at all. The game is pretty difficult though, especially in the beginning, so you better save it often. If you've never played the original, I'd highly suggest checking out a portion of a long play just to get the gist to help you understand the mechanics. Don't be overwhelmed. Take your time. It's a game that really deserves to be explored fully. Graphically, it's just beautiful. Sometimes I even feel like I'm playing the Amiga version. It's that impressive, with its attention to detail, and a lot of thought and planning has gone into its control scheme, which isn't a natural fit for the C64, but the team make it work very well overall. This is another landmark title for the C64, and is, without a doubt, the new benchmark for dungeon crawlers on the system. I'll leave a link to the developer's website, as it contains lots of useful information on how to set up and play this game on all C64 related systems and emulation. I tested it on a real C64 with my Kung Fu Flash cartridge, and it worked great. But I don't have a mouse, as I said earlier, so I was very limited as to what I could do. The C64 Maxi also works really well. The Mini is a no-go, I'm afraid, but VAS emulation was the best for me for this game. So download it, it's free, and enjoy one of the greatest dungeon crawlers ever, now on your humble C64. And what a fantastic remake. If you want to download this, I'll leave the links in the description. The game is free. And if you haven't checked out the first 2 episodes, the first one's a remake of Rescue on Fractalus on the PC, and the second one is a remake of the Sega Master System version of Sonic the Hedgehog on the Commodore 64. Thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. I hope you had a good time. And if you can please like and subscribe, they'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Come quietly or there will be trouble. Thank you for your cooperation. I'd buy that for $1.
Hey, Bastish B for 64K, and welcome to episode number 4 of Retro Remakes. So, if you've never watched this show before, I take a look at remakes of classic computer and console games, official and unofficial. And the game we're going to have a look at today is Sonic Triple Trouble, originally released on the Sega Game Gear in 1994. But it's got recently remade on the PC in 2022 under the name Sonic Triple Trouble 16-bit. But before we look at that one, let's go back to the original. Sonic Triple Trouble, also known as Sonic and Tails 2 in Japan, was released on the Game Gear by Sega in 1994 and developed by Aspect, a Japanese software developer formed in 1991 in Ikebukuro, Japan. They worked on over 30 games until their eventual closure in 2018. A large majority of those games were on handhelds like the Game Gear, WonderSwan and 3DS. They were also responsible for many of Sonic's 8-bit outings on both the Master System and Game Gear, including today's game, as well as the awesome Tails Adventure and Sonic Chaos, to name a few. Triple Trouble is in fact a sequel to Sonic Chaos, a previous 1993 Master System and Game Gear release. The game itself does a great job of capturing that 16-bit stylings of the Mega Drive titles, spread across 6 diverse zones with 3 levels in each, plus bonus stages, mixing up the usual platforming action formula the series is known for. In this one you can choose to either play Sonic Sonic or Tails in the beginning, with each character having their own useful abilities. Sonic has speed and the boost ability from Sonic CD, and Tails as usual can fly for short bursts of time. Both these characters' abilities allow certain maps to be explored easier, so playing the game through twice will give you a different experience. Your mission as usual is to stop Robotnik from using the Chaos Emeralds. He's also aided this time by Knuckles as his henchman, and they also introduced the new character, Knack the Wild West Weasel, on his own hunt for the powerful emeralds. The game overall scored really well in magazines of the time, regarded as most by one of the best Game Gear Sonic games, despite the fact that the game is way too easy.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
And now that you know a little bit about the origins, let's check out the new version. Sonic Triple Trouble 16-bit is an unofficial remake released in August of 2022 by Noah Copeland for Windows, and an Android version is currently being worked on as of making this. A game that he built single-handedly using the Game Maker Studio engine. This game is so well put together, taking all the levels of the Game Gear original and changing out the layouts and adding new enemies and tweaks all over the place, all done in the look and style of a 16-bit Mega Drive Genesis Sonic game, right down to the smallest details. Not only visually is it on point, but the music is also upgraded to 16-bit style, with a host of really great gameplay additions and options that you would expect if this was originally converted back in the 90s. I like how Noah has managed to add a lot of gameplay additions to the game, but still hasn't veered off the tracks to feel completely different. It's just enough to keep the original feel intact, besides the new stage layouts giving them a much bigger scope and depth, and some new 3D special stages, which is always cool. The best change has been able to switch between Sonic and Tails on the fly during gameplay. You no longer have to choose a character in the beginning, which makes the game now feel like a co-op game but only single player, with sequences that are clearly designed to be better for one character or the other to navigate. It's really cool. He manages to nail the gameplay as well, with full modern gamepad support, of course, but those 16-bit graphics are just spot on, reminding me of the excellent Sonic Mania, one of my favorite Sonic games ever, next to Sonic 2 and Sonic CD. Other notable options include support for either 16:9 ratio or classic 4:3, and multiple language settings, and a whole host of mini multiplayer games to jam against a friend couch co-op style. This is a wonderful remake, not only bringing this 8-bit gem to a 16-bit style, but adding to it in so many ways. All we need now is Sega to acknowledge it so we can get a glorious physical version of this Sonic Mania style. And another excellent unofficial remake. I'll leave links in the description so you can download it for free. If you haven't checked out the previous episodes, please have a look. I got Rescue on Fractalus, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Eye of the Beholder, all excellent remakes. Thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. I hope you had a good time. And if you can please like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B for 64K, and welcome to a new episode of Retro Remakes. And welcome back. So this show is all about taking a look at retro remakes of classic arcade, console, or home computer games, official or unofficial. And today's game we're going to have a look at is Turbo Outrun, Sega's arcade game from 1989. It's recently got a remake on the PC. It is unofficial. Is it exactly a remake? Not really. It takes elements from the original arcade, mixes in elements from the original game, and kind of becomes its own thing. It is mostly based on Turbo Outrun though, but more on that a little bit later. But in order to understand this new version, let's take a quick look at the original arcade version. 1989 saw the release of Turbo Outrun by Sega in the arcades. This is a sequel to the original arcade game Outrun, which came out in 1986 and was designed by legend Yu Suzuki. Most of the same team from Sega's AM2 division worked on this arcade sequel, including Hiroshi Kawaguchi, who composed the original Immortal soundtrack. And although this isn't quite as good as that, it still has some rocking Sega tunes to get you in the mood for tearing down those highways. In this version, you have to race across the USA, from New York to LA, and features 16 stages in total. Unlike the original, you cannot choose your path and there's only one to follow, but there are a bunch of extra features to make up for this. First, as the name suggests, your Ferrari is outfitted with a turbo booster to send the car into overdrive for brief periods of time. You can't use it all the time or else the car overheats, so you got to keep a reasonable balance between driving well and using it on those nice long straights, or to boost start after a crash. Another cool aspect is that after every 4 stages you get to take a break and have a chance to choose an upgrade for your car, from a souped up engine, better gripping tires, or an enhanced turbo feature. And the last major addition is you racing against an opponent as well as the time clock. If he beats you to the last of the 4 checkpoints, your girlfriend would ditch you and join him for the next leg of the race. So much for true love. Is this game as good as the original? No, it's not. But that doesn't mean it's bad. It's still a very cool, fun, fast-paced arcade ride with good graphics, a cracking soundtrack, and tons of variety in its 16 stages to make it a game still well worth a go on MAME or the arcade original if you can still find one kicking about.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
And now that you know a little bit more about the original arcade, let's take a look at this new PC version. Turbo Outrun Reimagined is a fantastic new unofficial PC release by Coda Skids, and is a huge homage to the classic 89 Turbo Outrun arcade game, but also in a sense 80s and early 90s Sega Superscaler arcades in general, hence the title Reimagined as opposed to Remake. So what we have here is a new game made with Unity that runs at a blistering 60 frames per second and takes the original Turbo Outrun and plays with it, taking its best features and remixing it with modern graphics and large doses of classic pixel art, mashed together for something that shouldn't really work, but in this case it works brilliantly. Turbo's best features are still here with the nifty turbo boost and all the car upgrading and repairs available between legs of the races. And now onto the new features. The game also offers 2 modes of play. Original, which is the straight turbo arcade, meaning point-to-point racing against the clock and an opponent, plus it also offers the new work-in-progress Outrun mode, which gives Turbo the original Outrun's best feature, which is branching paths to make your own way to your final destination. You also now have 5 vehicles to choose from, each with slightly different stats, but overall they feel pretty much the same. It's still fun to have the options of the original Outrun car, the Turbo one, a Chase HQ looking Lamborghini, a Corvette, and even the bike from Sega's Super Hang-On. You can also pick your own music in the beginning from either Outrun, Turbo Outrun, or Super Hang-On, or just have it randomly play from all those games. Unfortunately, you can't select your own favorite tunes like in the original, but I love the fact that Skids, who's clearly a Commodore 64 fan, included the C64 Outrun Turbo theme by Jerome Tell as the main menu music, which is a fantastic choice. There's also a large dose of subtle Sega, C64, and retro gaming references. I love the blatant mountainside stage with the mountain graphics replicating the Commodore 64 version of Accolade's Test Drive, plus other nods to Sonic, Chase HQ, Fantasy Zone, and many more. Clearly the work of a true retro gaming fan. The difficulty is also toned down dramatically from the originals. You can bounce off cars without slowing down too much. Big crashes are also recoverable very fast, which keeps the fast pace going, and it just makes it way more accessible to anyone wanting a bit of retro gaming styled racing fun without being murdered in the process. The graphic style works very well. The insane speed of the road mixed with the classic pixel art looks fantastic. It's done extremely extremely well. This game is available for free or name your own price on PC, and I'll leave links in the video description for you to check it out. It's a wonderful homage to some of my favorite arcade races. And that's it for this episode. Links to download this game on the video description. Thanks for joining me, BastishB at 64K. I hope you had a good time. And if you can please like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.
Hit the gas.